Yeah. Oh. Hotel room. Always working. Yeah. Out in California, counting up my blessings. Only 24 with a multi-million dollar.
Folks, what it do? I appreciate everybody tuning in to the first ever episode of The Hustle. Kind of had this itch for a while now. Don't really know what it's going to turn into. Might fall flat on my face. Might do something amazing. But just got a lot of stuff to say. Love running my mouth, so I figured I'd give it a shot. But I didn't want to dive into a specific topic right away. What I kind of want to do was give a little framework for, where I'm coming from, where my mind is, and kind of how this whole kind of compound thing started, from us just kind of dragging kids around the country, being some crazy dads, to starting a private training facility, to having a clothing company and not really having a clue what we were doing as far as like manufacturing or designing clothes and sportswear, to where we're at now, as a pretty big brand in the sport of wrestling and continuing to grow, and a pretty reputable club as well, in the wrestling scene. So it kind of all started. I kind of grew up in the graphics world. My degree's in 3D animation and design, and when I graduated from school, there was a big need for web designers, web developers. The dot-com boom had hit, and there was just a ton of opportunity for that. And the bandwidth and the internet hadn't quite caught up to the fact, or where the technology was at, to where, we could put 3D animation and even video on the web. So I dove right into web design and development, kind of learned on the job, really never used much of my degree. But I always had that kind of sense of design and like sketching and like drawing and like graphic work and things like that. So, as I learned more and more about the web industry, I kind of got the itch to get more into this marketing, advertising agency type environment, as opposed to developing software, which is what I was doing. We were developing email software and stuff like that. And back then, sending an image in the body of an email was like a big deal. So as the internet progressed, obviously the technology was, progressing along with it. And I kind of found myself in this ad agency environment, which I loved, but it kind of constrained me a little bit. We were doing a lot of work for clients, Fortune 500 clients, and I loved the ability to grow a brand and get big wins for clients with ad campaigns. But it just, I had too many parameters. I have to have a specific amount of chaos in my life in order for me to function. And I don't know if that's a creative thing or just me. But so anyways, that's kind of how my brain has been in industry for a long time. And probably around 2005, 2006, I started getting back into wrestling. I was out of wrestling for a handful of years, and my oldest son comes home from middle school and gives me a flyer for wrestling tryouts or whatever. And I'm just like, I never thought he would wrestle. He was a little bit of a mama's boy, but just never really played a ton of sports or anything like that. And it's like, now he's going to wrestle. So it's like, holy smoke. So he gets back into wrestling, and then lo and behold, the high school coach that the middle school fed into ended up being a guy that was a huge mentor in my coaching career. But when I was in high school, he was like coaching one of the better high schools in the state. As guy by the name of Marty Hutzel, and I hated him when he was in high school. He was just a very animated Bobby Knight kind of guy, and I just didn't care for his antics and any of that stuff. But he was one of the best coaches in the state, and still is to this day. I think he's one of the only wrestling coaches that's in the Georgia Hall of Fame as a sport, as all sports, not wrestling Hall of Fame, but he is in a Georgia Sports Hall of Fame as a wrestling coach. And I think there's maybe only like one or two other guys. So. Of course, he's mellowed out a little bit more. I've grown up a little bit more, and the man for probably 7 years, I just followed this guy around and listened to everything he said. And, you know, obviously my son ended up wrestling through middle school and high school. And that was kind of the jump off of my coaching career. Again, I got out of wrestling, and I was done for a while. I was in the working world, and just really never thought I'd get back into it. And, you know, Marty kind of lit that fire back under me and just taught me an immense amount about, you know, coaching and mentoring. And, you know, he did it his way and did it a different way. But, you know, I picked and choose what I wanted to adapt to my coaching style. So we're back in this wrestling thing, you know, and I'm constantly looking at angles. I'm constantly looking at different perspective of how to do stuff. That's just the way I'm wired. And I noticed I started getting back involved with, you know, the Team Georgia stuff and the traveling and this, that, and the other. You know, my son's starting to get pretty good, and, you know, what's next? What's the next level? As any crazy dad would do. And I just realized there was a big void. There was a huge void for our good kids, or even our above average kids, getting out and wrestling other above average talent, or wrestling other good talent, or being seen, or even having a chance to beat other really, really good kids from around the country. And you got to understand, 10 years is a immense amount of time in terms of how our sport has changed from a wrestling perspective. So back then, I mean, Super 32 had just started using UNC Greensboro. And it was such a small tournament compared to what it was. And there was not 18,000 preseason national tournaments and postseason national tournaments and 100 summer dual options and all that stuff. So to get in front of the country's best, or even have a chance to wrestle the country's best, you had to travel extensively, and there was only a handful of dates a year. And so I get with a couple crazy dads. I started taking my son to Arturo, which a lot of people know is the dreadlock, crazy dressing guy who's kind of a legend in Georgia. He started the first private training facility in Georgia, and I actually went to his facility when I was coming through high school. For some odd reason, he just wasn't able to get me good as a wrestler, but he's gotten a lot of other people great at wrestling. Maybe it was just me, but you know, so it was the obvious go-to. So there was some dads, a kid by the name of TJ Mitchell, L.A. Ruffin, and Brandon Veazey, and a couple other guys that we were still kind of starting to get back into wrestling and coaching, and our kids were wrestling for whatever, you know, age group or this, that, and the other. So it was kind of one of those things. It's like, man, we got to figure out a way to get our kids to the best tournaments. Team Georgia only did Fargo and junior duels. There were no other things that Team Georgia offered. So, you know, being the kind of, you know, headbutt everybody and do it my way type mentality when I was fresh out of college and been in the industry for a couple years, and I knew everything. I decided I was going to start my own nonprofit, and we were going to call it the GNWA, the Georgia National Wrestling Alliance. And my kind of spin on it is we were going to have the sickest gear, we were going to have the best training, and it was going to be the best experience for these kids. We weren't just going to like cram 37 kids in a 15-passenger van, drive 17 hours to Northeast Ohio or PA or wherever, and get our heads kicked in and then drive back home. I wanted the kids to experience something through the training, through the travel, wearing the gear, just a total package. So we started traveling. We kind of dubbed ourselves the GNWA Gorillas, and I just kind of started designing our gear, and I was getting Brute to make the singlets, getting a local guy to screen print the shirts, you know, and just in the back of my mind, not really thinking, you know, anything's going to come of it from a teamwear or a clothing design perspective or anything. I just want our kids to look cool. I wanted to look cool first, and then I want our kids to look cool second. So, you know, we start doing this, and it was basically like $150. We pick 3 high schools in the metro Atlanta area. $150. We'll do a 5-week training cycle, 3 practices a week. That covers your training, charter bus up to the event, hotel. All you got to do is pay your entry fee and food money. And we're thinking it's just going to be us core crazy dads. It was me, L.A. Ruffin, Brandon Veazey, Matty B, Josh and Mike Steven, Tom Mitchell, and I'm missing 1 or 2 other guys, but like that was like the core. And I'm thinking, maybe we'll get a couple fringe kids. First couple trips we did is Super 32 and NHSCA and stuff like that. Man, we got 40, 50 kids on a charter bus. We got some of the best kids in the state coming to these little practices we're doing. And I don't know to this day if they were illegal or not, but we never got caught. So I guess that means they weren't illegal. But most of us were high school coaches, and most of us were in a high school room coaching kids that weren't us in school out of season. But I guess karma played a role in that, and nobody popped us because we were doing good, and the whole thing was we were just trying to provide opportunity. So, and as I've kind of told this story in my head before I decided to record it in a podcast and give you guys some framework of how I got A to Z, or A to D where I'm at right now. Still got a long way to go to get to Z. Is a lot of the things that we did or I did along the way, there was good intentions behind them. There was never a parlay it into money or grow my brand into this. I was still working a 9 to 8 every day, and just squeezing all this stuff in between. So, as I tell the story, there'll be some goodwill things that I've done, or some philanthropy things that I've done that I really wasn't thinking about it at the time of turning it into anything else. And as the journey kind of went, it just kind of panned out that way. So we start dragging kids around the country, and we're dragging some hammer squads around, by Georgia standards back then. And we'd be lucky to walk away from NHSCA with a placer, or Super 32 with kids, getting more wins than they had losses. And, it was a start. It was a start. And I would go to the Team Georgia meetings, and I would ask a bunch of questions, and I would, kind of call them out on some of the stuff. And there was a very tense relationship between GNWA and Team Georgia, but more so Cliff Fretwell and Team Georgia. And all I wanted them to do was just live by their core values and do what Team Georgia was put in place to do. And there were some people at the time that were involved with it, that were involved for the wrong reasons. And I think we've progressed into a group of people that are in it for the right reasons. And not everybody that was involved back then was in it for the wrong reasons, but there was some core people that, that were a little toxic to that movement. So what it in turn did is, and we're talking years and years down the road. I think my oldest son graduated 2009, because I think he graduated from Indiana, 2013, 4 years later, 5 years later. So what it in turn did was it kind of put some heat on Team Georgia to do some of the same stuff we were doing in the folk style realm, because they had only been this kind of freestyle element, schoolboy, cadet, junior duels, and then we take our kids to Fargo, and then that's our main thing for the year. They really didn't do anything outside of that. Kids tournaments, things like that. But as far as initiative to get our best kids wrestling the best kids around the country, there wasn't a huge initiative. So you would have Team Georgia launch this big campaign and basically say, okay, if GNWA is taking 60 plus kids to Super 32 for $150, we're going to take as many kids as we can cram on a charter bus to Iowa preseason nationals, and we're going to charge $100. And what they didn't realize at the time, when they were trying to get back at us, or whatever the motive was to do it, pissing contest, was basically, instead of the 7, 8, 10 kids that were going around the country on their parents' own dime and really no training cycle, just basically going to this one club and getting practices in random places, there was a training cycle in place. There was an effort in place. There was a tight-knit coaching staff that had a training cycle in mind and an end goal in mind for the kids that we were doing with the GNWA. And now Team Georgia was jumping on board and doing their own version of it. So instead of having those 7 little 8 kids running around the country going to Super 32, we now had 100 plus 120 kids between Super 32 with GNWA and with Team Georgia taking kids to preseason nationals. So that was kind of the jump off point for us to kind of take a step back, grow up a little bit, and just be like, look, these are 2 great things going on. You guys are a great organization. We're kind of doing this rogue, kind of unchecked thing, which we liked doing. But after about 4 or 5 years of it, we had started Team Minion. And my goal with Team Minion, because LA Ruffins kid was a lot younger at the time, we were going to a lot of high school events. There wasn't a lot of youth tournaments to go to. So Mike Gianfala and LA, Ruffin, and myself kind of started Team Minion, and it's the same Team Minion that's Team Minion today. And this was probably, God, this was probably 2006, 2007, somewhere around in there as well. And, it was about a year or so after we got going, and like the kids that go on the trips, we had like dog tags made for them, and just, just little tiny marketing things to just get kids excited about going on a trip. And like if they went on 3 trips with Team Minion, they got like a special patch and they could sew it on their bag and stuff like that. And we were a nonprofit, and we were doing things like that purely for just to generate love for going to bigger events and getting kids together. And, obviously a lot of people are aware of Team Minion now and the impact that they've had on the youth wrestling scene. And, dads have come and gone, and, different people have ran it probably not the way I would agree with, but, again, it's a vehicle to get kids out there, and it's done a lot of great things. So that was another kind of an arm of this GNWA thing that kind of got launched in the middle of all this stuff going on, and ended up being something pretty cool and something that's lasting. The GNWA that we did with the high school and dragging kids around kind of ended when myself and Lee Roper probably entered about 6 months to a year after we had started the GNWA. He had just graduated from App State. I think he did a year up there and then had moved down and was coaching with Josh Steven at Harrison High School, which they actually ended up having a couple Ironman placers or whatever that year. So I get to know Lee through Josh, and immediately me and Lee just click on like a veg out on technique and just stay up all night talking wrestling type level. And, the more and more we were in the room together, more and more we realized we were kind of the one and the same. So, we're traveling, we're going to these events, and, Lee doesn't have a kid, and my kid's getting close to graduate, and then my kid graduates, and we're still traveling and going to these events, and, and dragging these kids around the country, and I can't remember exactly when it was. I wasn't coaching in high school anymore. I coached one more year after Anthony graduated, and then I wasn't coaching in high school anymore. And my youngest son, Cameron, had no interest in wrestling at the time. And I just told him, I was like, man, I think we could do this thing in the private sector. And I had a couple people over the years approach me because I'd run Freestyle Club on the south side of Atlanta, and people would be like, dude, you should open a training facility. I'm like, south side of Atlanta is the worst place to open up training facility. It's just not rich in wrestling. It was kind of northwest Atlanta, or kind of straight north Atlanta in Cobb County, and then it kind of moved over to Gwinnett County, which is kind of northeast Atlanta now. And there just wasn't a ton of wrestling rich, roots down on the south side where I was. And long story short, me and LA just get in a car one Saturday afternoon, drive around, find a building, sign a lease on that Monday, stroke the deal with the GHSA to get Resolite mats super cheap. We were going to put their logo on the bottom and put our logo on the top. They were going to get to borrow them a couple times a year for state duels and the tournament. And we were off and running. I think one of the cool things about the process when me and Lee decided to start running this club, we had already created a bunch of great relationships with a lot of kids. Like Taylor Lujan was traveling with us, going to high school tournaments when he was like in 7th grade, and look where he's at now. I mean, he was a day one compound kid when we decided to get into the private sector. He wrestled at the compound, and now he's at Northern Iowa, and coincidentally enough, Roper's there too. And has moved on to coaching in college. But the process of all we wanted to do is get kids excited about wrestling and traveling and getting them in front of an audience and getting them in front of college coaches and giving them a window of opportunity to beat the best kids in the country kind of morphed into, okay, we're doing this private training facility thing. We're gonna market and run a business, and we're gonna coach kids, and we're gonna take money from them. And initially, it was a little bit of a conflict of interest for me, because I was always give back guy. You got to give back. You got to give back. You got to get back to wrestling. But at the end of the day, when the landlord comes around, like showing him all the volunteer hours that you did to coach and mentor kids during the week don't pay the bills. So we kind of had to get over that real quick. And I'm not a businessman like a lot of people probably think I am. I'm a hustler, and I'm a dreamer, and I'm a visionary, and I'm a hard worker. But I'm not a strategist in that sense. And the more I'm in business, I think the better I'm getting at it. Or actually, I'd say this: the more I listen to smart people, the more I can regurgitate the smart stuff they say, and it makes me sound like I'm a businessman. But for the most part, I'm just a worker. And I think when we first started and opened the gym, we both didn't have a real good sense of business and what it would take to run a business and how we needed to run a business. We just wanted to coach wrestling. And I was still working at that agency. I was 40 minutes away. Roper was still coaching at Jefferson until that first full year that we were open, and he was driving all the way from Jefferson, which was like an hour and 20 minutes. So he literally leave school, drive, and get to practice right before practice started. Same with me. And we did that for probably 3 years, and that was 2007 when we did that, and I get laid off at the ad agency. They lose some big like $100 million account with Verizon or whatever, and I'm a creative director or whatever, or art director or whatever. And they're trimming the fat, and I'm the first to go, one of the first to go. But in all honesty, I was pretty checked out already on it. I had some side things going on. And again, the hustler part, I had some little side things going on, and I'm designing this and that and freelancing and stuff. So it probably was the best thing for me. It definitely was the best thing for me. They probably had a target on me for a while up there and just kept me around. But anyway, so I get laid off at Moxie, and for a whole day, I don't tell the wife, and I'm trying to figure out the best business presentation I can give to my wife to let me just coach wrestling full time. And she's working at a law firm, and we were doing well, but it was just going to be real tough to make the wrestling thing work. So I'm just trying to find a way to spin it to her like any red-blooded American male that coaches wrestling has to constantly spin why he's going on a wrestling trip to his wife on a regular basis. But this was like a life thing. So long story short, me and Roper kind of tag teamed the speech. It didn't go over great, but it didn't go over horrible. And somehow I found myself just being a full-time wrestling coach. And that was not paying the bills, but we made it work. And this is where the fun began, because now you got me and Lee. We had moved into this house. We had some land. There was like a loft over the garage, or next to the garage. So Roper was living 45 feet from where I'm living. We're both pretty much wrestling coaches. Wrestling practice don't really start until 2:33-ish. So we had a lot of free time on our hands. I was freelancing, doing a little bit of stuff here and there, but the Ropewell previews really started coming into play. And again, that was just something I can't remember. We had started doing some filming for Flow, just being fanatics, and our kids were so bad that everybody be knocked out of the tournament by the second round, third round, fourth round tops. We're cleaned out, right? And we're bringing our cameras and like filming the quarterfinals, filming the semifinals. So like we're announcing like some of the craziest stuff, like Ben Whitford back in the day, Super 32, just smashing everybody to pieces, and Joey Dance super ducking everybody and crazy stuff like that. And like we're mat side for a lot of this stuff, and we started covering some events on our own, and everybody's heard the old school stories of mat side filming, staying up all night, naming and labeling videos, and then finding a hotel that had Wi-Fi or a direct connection plug to upload them, and doing it that route. But again, we were just doing it because we wanted to contribute. Flow at the time was still kind of this grassroots YouTube-y for wrestling type thing that Martin had started, and it was just Joe Flow and just a bunch of weekend warriors like me and Zeb and a couple other guys, Ed Picola and just a few guys, and we were just contributing everything we could film, and so we already kind of had an end with Flow, and we're wrestling fanatics, and I'm leaving to go to Vegas. Me and Joe were going out there to film the Vegas invite, and me and Roper were going over our fantasy teams, and that's where, I don't know why I named Frank Molinaro the Gorilla Hulk, but I did it in a preview right before Vegas because we were going over our fantasy teams, and I was like, dude, we're sitting here talking and arguing about who's got the best team and who's going to score. I was like, dude, let's film it and put it on the internet. And God, I can't even remember what year that was. It wasn't a time when people were doing a lot of preview filming or even podcasting and putting it on the internet. And so we filmed the long and dirty Vegas preview, and it's still on Flow. And it's me and Roper sitting in the backyard just talking about our fantasy teams. And little did we know that like people would love it and eat it up and comment on it. And that was back when you could comment on videos, and you could actually see the video that you uploaded, how many views it got, and things like that. And it just kind of became something that me and Roper did instead of sitting on my back patio and, you know, drinking a cold glass of milk and arguing about wrestling or talking about wrestling technique. Man, we just spreadsheeted it up and just dug down in the trenches and, you know, threw out what I still think to this day is some of the coolest, you know, wrestling banter out there. And it was a lot of me going way off the reservation with ridiculous stuff and Roper trying to reel me back in and keep me in his like safe world of calmness and proper thought. And it was just a perfect balance of just total chaos in my head and making a random good point every now and then. But mainly, you know, Roper trying to reel me back in or me dragging Roper out into the deep waters of ridiculousness where I was thinking. And it basically was a wrestling relationship of us talking about wrestling that we broadcast on the internet. And still to this day, that's probably one of the coolest things I think I've ever been involved in wrestling. Nothing will ever trump being able to coach and mentor kids and watch them chase their dreams and goals and stuff. But getting to do that with Roper and experience that, and even if he moved back home tomorrow and we started it back up, again, it's one of those things that happened in your life that we grew together, following the sport, covering things for Flow, and doing these Ropewell interviews that you know, that was just something you can't go back and replicate. And one of the things, again, that we were doing at the time, that we really didn't realize how much it was increasing our footprint as individual brand, but also our footprint as Compound Guys is, you know, we're doing these previews and thousands of people are watching them, and, you know, and we're wearing Compound stuff and we're talking about Compound kids or going to Compound practice or Compound's going to be traveling here this weekend. It wasn't a ton, but we're peppering it in there because it's what's going on in our lives. And it just helps springboard the CMP brand to that next level. And, you know, it wasn't a by design thing. It was just something crazy we started doing. And then, you know, we parlayed it into, you know, some brand growth. And it was, you know, it was a really cool experience. Those are late nights and early mornings and disagreements over picks and a bunch of random stuff that, man, I'll cherish those for the rest of my life. I don't necessarily think my wife will. But those are some good times with Roper. And again, I'm still still designing our uniforms, and by now we've been getting people kind of stop us at tournaments and be like, dude, who's doing your uniforms? Who's doing it? Because I'm designing all the Compound stuff now. So, you know, I would get hit up when we had the GNWA stuff, but I mean, I just really didn't have an interest in doing it. I didn't see the business aspect of it. I'd rather go make a website and get paid X and then design T-shirts. So, I'm designing our stuff and we're getting hit up more and more. And then people are like, hey, I'll pay you X amount of dollars to design my gear. And I know that you're not going to make my gear, but I want cool looking gear. So I just start designing people's stuff. And I started sending it to a local vendor and tried to work out a deal with them. And it wasn't enough for the amount of business I was sending them. They were getting my business because I was the one bringing the business in because they want my designs. And then I was just funneling it to this local business to make. So one of the aforementioned guys, Brandon Veazey, he had just randomly out of the blue while coaching and traveling with us decided he was going to go to law school. And like, if you knew this guy 2 years before he went to law school, this would be a shock to any. I don't want to put him on the same plane. It was close. So anybody that's listening to this that knows Matty B, like that would be Matty B just deciding he's going to go to law school, which It would have been a disaster. Matty B won't get mad that I would say that. But Brandon just decides he's going to up and go to law school. So he just poof off the face of the planet, goes to Mercer Law School, and actually graduated crazy high in his class and is working at this big firm downtown, Troutman Sanders, and like this dude's a whiz kid all of a sudden. I never saw that potential in him, but no, I'm just kidding. He was always a brainiac. But so he's busting my chops about, hey dude, you should start a clothing company. And I'm like, I don't know anything about clothing. I don't know anything about anything. I just design our stuff in a cool little template and send it off. And these magic elves make these singlets. And he's busting my chops. One day we're done with practice, and me and Roper are just sitting in the office. Roper was probably talking about how he showed something wrong or this, that, and the other, or just critiquing something, being highly critical. And VZ walks in, and he's got this like binder. And he just sits it on my desk. He's like, you own a clothing company. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, he had gone and drawn up and drafted up a operating agreement and an LLC for Compound Clothing. So for probably 3 to 4 months, that binder sat on my desk, and I didn't look at it, didn't open it. I didn't even think about it. I told my wife about it, and I was like, Stephanie, this dude's crazy. And, of course, she didn't want to hear me starting another business, seeing as that the business that I chose after I got laid off was not the most high-paying business on the planet. But, again, it was kind of that we were just putting so much goodness back in the world back then with this group of kids. And when we started out, like, we really didn't know how to coach. We thought we knew how to coach. But the kids didn't know how to wrestle either. So it was a great relationship. And the cool part about it is, you know, the Joey Lasers, the Eric Luhans, the Hunter Gambles, the Brian Mosleys, the Boyce Cornwells, all these guys that were NCAA qualifiers or All-Americans or round of place guys that came out of our club, you know, like they learned how to wrestle while we learned how to coach. And it was just, I'll never be able to go back and start with another group and not know how to coach and learn how to coach while they wrestle. So that phase of our lives and that bond we have with those guys, and anybody that started a club, whether it's a USA club or brick and mortar private training facility or whatever, anybody that started a process like that, when you're supposed to be the leader and they're supposed to be the follower, but you both are kind of leading the blind. It's just a crazy process to go through. And as we're starting to approach knowing what we're kind of doing with the wrestling club, this whole venture with the clothing company comes along. And I'll never forget, we had moved out of our old building and moved into this new gigantic building, which was one of the stupidest things we've ever done. And it ended up playing out okay because we started the clothing company, but we're in this giant 12,000 square foot facility. Had no business being in there as just a wrestling gym. We were going to do MMA and kickboxing and all this stuff, and it was just a huge disaster. I'm driving to the gym, and I hear on the radio that they took wrestling out of the Olympics. And I'm like freaking out, and I go into my office, and I'm like, man, I gotta act. I gotta do something. I gotta be the guy that does something first in this chaos. Everybody's bitching and complaining. I gotta do something first. So I get on Facebook. I create Save Olympic Wrestling, the Save Olympic Wrestling Facebook page, and I just share it out. And I don't really pay too much attention to it. And I'm just posting articles and this, that, and the other. I'm going to inform people. I just want everybody to be one central location, that all the stuff that, it wasn't even UWW back then. It was FILA, anything that FILA puts out or ESPN or USA Wrestling. I just want to condense it all in this one place. And Flo was doing a decent job at the time of covering a lot of that, but I mean, they're dynamic and what they do now has changed dramatically with their reach and just the product they provide. So by lunchtime, there's like 35,000 followers, and I'm like texting people, and I'm like losing my mind, and I'm like, holy smokes, this is crazy, man. I just thought it was cool. And then I can't remember who it was, but either somebody commented or somebody texted me or something and was just like, dude, you should do a Save Olympic Wrestling shirt. And at the time, like, I didn't even think about it, right? Because I had done some shirts. Like I I did the Gorilla Hulk shirt, and I sold a bunch of those shirts for Frank Molinaro his senior year at NCAAs to raise money for the Adam Fry Foundation. I did these Kid Dynamite shirts and the Vermonster shirts and stuff like that, and we just kind of sold them to the fans. And then, I donated all the money to the Adam Fry Foundation. And so kind of people were starting to know I was a little bit in this kind of clothing scene, but I really hadn't pulled the trigger and like, hey, I'm a sportswear manufacturer and I do custom teamwear type thing. So I sit there and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do, how I'm going to sell it. I didn't have an e-commerce website or whatever. So I designed this shirt. It's got the Olympic rings on it, Save Olympic Wrestling. I put it up on the Facebook page. And everybody's like, where do I buy it? Where do I buy it? Where do I buy it? And I'm like, you freaking idiot. Like, first rule of business, you're going to put a product out there. You got to have some way to drive traffic to buy this product. So immediately take it down. Go to Shopify, and Shopify is like rudimentary as hell at this time of their growth. Like right now, it's the best e-commerce platform on the planet if you want to sell anything. It's just because it's so integrated. But back then, it was very, very simple, very rudimentary. But I had my web background, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And I go create a Shopify account real quick, and I'm throwing up logos and branding it and this, that, and the other. And I finally get it set up, and I'm like, it's like that weird UPS commercial or logistics commercial where the guys like launch their site and they're just kind of sitting there waiting, and like a couple sales tick off, and then like 4 or 5 more sales, and then it just starts going mad crazy through the roof. That's exactly what happened. So I put it up on the Save Olympic page, and I'm like, hey, buy this shirt. It'll ship in a couple weeks. Parentheses, I don't even know who the hell's going to print these things. I haven't even got a quote or anything from anybody. I'm still doing kind of stuff, contract on the side with this dude in Atlanta. And dude, it just goes through the roof. And by then there's probably 50,000. I think it got up to 112,000. I changed it to the Wrestling Wire now, and that's kind of my like next kind of venture to put media out there and stuff. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but I went ahead and rebranded it, so I'm going to play around with it. And I'll talk a lot about that way more in another podcast about how powerful the dynamics and algorithms and stuff are with Facebook and Instagram. So I'm still learning and figuring out what I'm going to do with that. But so I ended up, me and Stephanie, but I did the most of it. I ended up probably packing and shipping worldwide about 10 to 11,000 of those shirts. And I remember it got so bad that the guy that I was giving it all to like told me if I didn't come up there and help him print them that he wasn't going to print anymore for me. And I was in a bind because I'm taking people's money, and it's cool. Everybody pays their money and it's for a good cause. But after about a day, when they're feeling good about what they did, they want their damn shirts. So I was starting to get inundated with people wanting their stuff, and like people from Germany cussing at me in different languages. So I was literally like coaching wrestling, working at a screen printing shop for this guy to make sure all this stuff got fulfilled, and then staying up all night with an inkjet printer, printing out freaking USPS labels and packing shirts and shipping them all over the country, which was crazy. But that was kind of the jump off point for our brand. And a lot of people started seeing Compound, and we ended up at this big foam check made. Believe it or not, USA Wrestling, as gracious as they were that I was giving them, $10,000, $12,000, they made me pay for my flight up to Rumble on the Rails. They made me pay for the big giant foam check that I gave them. They made me pay for the hotel I stayed in, and I graciously donated them a $12,000 check. And it was still a good experience. I would have went either way, but I gave the money and I loved it. And the kind of the background to that is it was another one of those things that I was just doing to grow awareness. And again, I'm not trying to say, hey, do all this stuff I did. I'm such a cool guy. I did all this nice stuff and all this other cool stuff happened to me. But it's a perfect example of, and I'm a firm believer in, it's a perfect example of if you're not doing stuff on the front end and not expecting a huge return, that stuff will come back. That stuff will come back 10,000 fold, and it might not come back when you want it to, but it'll come back. And I'd be lying if I wasn't thinking in the back of my mind at this point when I'm putting the shirt out there and putting our logo real small on it. I'm not thinking, hey, this would be good for some brand awareness. This would be really good if for some reason it blew up and our company was recognized. And it did. And that was kind of the jump off point for what we were doing. And then we just kept kind of plugging away at it. We just kept making a ton of mistakes. Went and bought a bunch of equipment we didn't know how to use, sublimation equipment, and just lost a bunch of money, ruined a bunch of shirts. And I'll never forget, like, we bought this one printer, and then I was going on vacation and just left it with Roper and was like, hey, man, try to figure this thing out by the time we get back. Like, we got teamwear orders that we got to spot sub shirts for. Like, we bought a spot sub printer, this Mamaki spot sub printer for like $37,000. We didn't even know how to turn the thing on. So, like, just stuff like that. And I think a lot of times, like, fear can be a thief for a lot of people. And I think fear can steal their ideas. It can steal their motivation. It can steal their drive. And one thing through this process that, you know, and probably the more podcasts I'll do, and please believe he'll be on it. But the more things I do and the more things I've done and the more people I've been around, you just got to be fearless, man. And that's one thing that I think me and Lee both shared was, like, we knew that no matter how bad we screwed up, we would put enough work back in to make it right, or to turn it into something else. Like, if the wrestling club thing didn't turn out, we would turn it into something else. Or, you know, we both were aware of the skill set we had to go back into another industry. And I think a lot of people let fear be that thief, and it steals their ambition and it steals their drive. And that's scary. That's scary. To me, it's more scary to let fear of some of that. So I say people like fail forward and don't be afraid to fail. And yeah, I get it, but being scared of doing X, Y, and Z and letting that just eat away at your ambition, it hurts, man. It hurts to watch some people that know they got the talent to go do something, but just fear won't let them have the balls to go do it. And that's something that, you know, I've really, really tried to live by. And, dude, I've fallen flat on my face and almost put our clothing company out of business on numerous occasions in the 7 years we've been around. The wrestling business has been pretty sustainable. Nobody's getting rich off of it, but, you know, the wrestling business to me is a brand arm for what we do. What it does for the kids and the parents and that environment it provides is plenty for me, whether I make a dime off of it or not. And I try to bring as many great people in around that business as possible. My initial mission statement was, man, like, you know, we're writing things down, and Charles Pike is like, you know, challenging us to, you know, figure out what our big, hairy, audacious goal is. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I want to create a company that every kid that I coach on any level that goes off and learns a skill that wants to come back and work for me, I can employ them. If they're employable, if they have the skill set, if they have the drive, the work, the willingness, the eagerness to exist in our environment and our culture, whatever that is, like that would be my end game for me from a business perspective. And we've had some guys come back. And we're just now at that phase where a lot of those guys are graduating college and doing their graduate year and then, you know, coaching a little bit, or going to business for themselves. But to have that vehicle for any of those guys to graduate and have that skill set and bring it back would just be cool. If I looked around one day and, like, the guys and girls that I coach, there's like 20 of them working for me, you know, and we already have that relationship. That expectation has already been there. They know what type of person I am. They see me working crazy hours and going to practice and then going back to work while they're leaving for practice and stuff like that. And, you know, we've got that bond. So I think over time, you know, I've learned so much about the growth process of learning how to be a coach and learning from all these other great coaches, but learning how to communicate with the athletes and learning how to communicate with the kids, and having kids that are open enough and smart enough to almost teach me how to be a coach and teach me how to coach them better. And now I even find myself taking a lot of the skills that I use to coach and mentor my athletes and applying them in other aspects of my business with my employees, just coaching in different ways. And, it's been unbelievable. It's been an unbelievable journey. It's been an unbelievable experience to get where we're at with the type of athletes we have, with the success they've had on the mat and off the mat, our graduation rate of our kids that go off to college, how our brand's grown from a wrestling perspective, social media perspective, how our clothing company's grown. And there's not been one person that we've hired that came in that was like a specialist. Like, even with Stephanie, I mean, she's the boss. She runs the company and just tries to keep me from screwing most of the important stuff up. But like, her background was in a totally different industry, and we're making it happen. The dude that's our production manager, like, was working and like driving a forklift, like at a factory, and like, but a friend of a friend of a friend recommended me, came in, he worked his ass off. Our production manager at that time left, and I just asked him, I'm like, hey, here's some things, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I'll take it. Like, he didn't even go home and think about it. And he's killed it every day since then. And he works his tail off. There's never been anybody that's come into our company that's been a specialist at something. They've all been people that have either learned on the job or just worked their tail off to figure out where they fit best in our company. And, we just ran with it. And there's been ups and downs, and there's been highs and lows, and, you learn from those. And if you can't just kind of learn to embrace that kind of crappy part every now and then, I think it's I think you got a long road to hoe in anything you're trying to do, any type of great situation you're trying to face. And I wanted to give a little framework for that. I wanted to let you guys kind of know where we started, and kind of our thought process along the way, and how we ended up where we're at, and what we're continuing to do. But, my goal hadn't changed from the jump. I want to be the best club coach in the country. I want to have the best club in the country, and I want to have the biggest brand in wrestling team wear. And, that piece of pie that we have right now is not big enough for me to eat on, the way I want to. So we're going to keep coming. We're going to keep innovating on all levels. We're going to innovate on the way we coach. We're going to innovate on the way we grow our social media platforms, our brands, our personal brands. And that's something I'm really big on right now, is people growing their personal brands off our brand. And leveraging that as much as they can, whether they stay working for us or not, or stay coaching for us or not. It's a huge opportunity for them to do that. So I'm learning every day, man. I'm learning from the people that I employ. I'm learning from the people that are 10,000 times smarter than me, that's done it a million times over, and I'm just trying to just nip at their heels. And it's gonna be real fun to continue this journey and see how far we can take it. I mean, at age 40. I got 40, 50 more years to keep grinding like this, so everybody needs to look out.
The journey is everything. There ain't no destination, man. The journey is everything. Looking back, I realize the journey is everything. Ain't no destination, man. The journey is everything.